Welcome to the first episode of Scientific Communication Tips. Today, we're going to be learning how to take Excel and PowerPoint graphs and figures and import them into Illustrator so that we can manipulate them and make them into something more clean and a little bit more easy to use when it comes to either PowerPoint or Keynote or even publication. Say you're trying to get a figure ready for final submission of a manuscript. Well, here's sort of an example of some of the output that we hope to achieve today, and you can see that it's pretty colorful, but yet it's so simple and it conveys the message of the figure, because that's really what's very important to scientific communication. I happen to love using Illustrator in order to do this because I feel that the advantages that Illustrator provides over, say, just doing this in PowerPoint or Excel it gives you a little bit more flexibility and as well as rigor in terms of how you can sort of reflect different data sets as well as keep them kind of consistent between different figures or across your PowerPoint presentations. I think that that's pretty important. One of the nice things you can also do within Illustrator is you can use the same figures in all sorts of different media as opposed to finding difficulties between transferring files and images between different programs and across different devices when they're not using a Mac or a PC. Let's see, I happen to be using the Adobe Illustrator Creative Suite 6, but everything that we're going to be talking about today can be done from Creative Suite 2 and upwards for certain, as I've used those in the past. However, I'm not entirely sure if you have older versions whether or not you'll be able to do quite everything quite the same way. You should be able to for the most part because we're not doing anything too technologically advanced for the Adobe Suite, Creative Suite programs. I'm also going to be, I'm on a Mac and I'm using Microsoft Office 2011. And one of the interesting things about the Office 11 package is that they made a couple of interesting design choices that would be sort of the default settings that I don't necessarily agree with and I kind of find them distracting when I look at a figure. So we'll talk about those here in a moment. But before that, let's go ahead and talk about where I got this data. And so I collected this data from a published figure that came out recently in PLOS Biology this week from the lab of Jeffrey Gordon and by Nathan McGinty et al. On the effects of diet resource utilization by gut microbiota in they use mouse models. Specifically germ-free mice, where they then reinoculated humanized gut bacteria into these different mice and looked at different phenotypes. One of the neat aspects of this article is that they have some pretty beautiful graphical representations of a lot of their data, and I found this to be really useful in consuming and understanding their story, but I wanted to sort of get into how some of these types of figures could be easily generated and hopefully help those who find it difficult to create these kinds of images easily. So Illustrator, using a combination of the Microsoft Office package and the Adobe Creative Suite software, we should be able to create something pretty similar to, say, these graphs here in this figure 4D. So we'll go ahead and I'll show you where I got this data. I went to the supporting information, and this particular article had 23 different supporting documents, including figures and tables. And I went over to the number, let's see, it should be supplemental table number 11. Yes, growth of Bacteroidetes WH2 strain, and comparing it to a couple other strains and how well they handle different types of metabolism on different types of compounds for growth rearing. And that file looks kind of like this. I truncated it. I'm going to go ahead and delete this because that's what we're going to be making. And but this is for the most part their original file. I just sort of truncated it. They had a few more strains. What we're going to be interested in this demonstration is just focusing on this growth rate column here and the mean standard deviation that they included. Here are some of the substrates that they use to grow this one strain of bacterium on. You can see that they use quite a variety, and that's what kind of made this article stand out to me, is that there was so much information here. There were, I think, 3 or 4 more strains of bacteria in this particular supplemental figure. And there's just so much information in a lot of ways that I figured it could be reanalyzed and looked at. Myself, I'm a visual learner, and I feel that having graphical representation of tabular data is very helpful, especially expressing stories. And I was interested in these growth rates on these different media, and so what I thought I'd do is just sort of make a quick graph. And for those of you who've worked in Excel already or PowerPoint, you know how to do this. It shouldn't be anything new to you. So we'll go ahead and select that column and come up to Chart and create a new column type of chart. Sure, this trick that we're going to be learning, technique I guess you could say, it would be a better term for it. This technique that we're learning for taking images and graphs and converting them over into Illustrator can be applied to any of these charts, as well as the tables here, and even the smart art or anything that you might draw using the shape tools in either Excel or PowerPoint or even Word. The same should be true pretty much for Keynote and numbers. I haven't really played with pages as much, so I don't really know, but for the most part you shouldn't run into any difficulties if you want to make something in Keynote or PowerPoint or numbers in Excel and move them into Illustrator. They transfer pretty well. There's a few tricks that we'll need to get into. But before we do, we're going to really just focus in on this example today. I might address those other things in future episodes, depending upon the need of the community. You can kind of see this is a sort of your standard graphical representation of data, and you know that you've gone to who knows how many conferences where you've seen this same style of presentation of data, with not really a lot done to sort of clean it up or make it look that much more intellectually stimulating, which is fine. I mean, this is a perfectly fair way to represent data. However, I think that it could be done a little bit better, a little bit more pleasing to help communicate the story a little bit more clearly. Sort of some of the standards that came with this version of Microsoft Office that I don't really agree with. They work for just sort of general use if you need to make a quick graph or whatever. But one of the first things I'll bring up is the fact that their text that they decided to use is this Calibri. I'm not sure really exactly how you say that, but they moved away from using more typical fonts. I like in everything that I do, whether or not it's for a presentation or a paper, I prefer to only use Arial. It's a simpler font. It's one that's found in any system, and you are very unlikely to have any issues with converting it to other programs. The other thing is size. I typically go ahead and try and boost up the size of my fonts a little bit. You don't really need a title. It will vary based upon your needs, of course, but for this demonstration it's not really necessary. I don't particularly like a lot of titles with my figures, except for maybe a poster presentation, but usually that goes into the figure legend. Sometimes in a PowerPoint presentation, if you're going to have multiple graphs being represented on a single presentation slide, but usually the title slide should explain what the figure is you're demonstrating. We'll get into those in other episodes. In addition, for what we're going to be doing, I'm going to represent this more as if I was going to try and publish it, but the same would still basically apply to just a presentation for a PowerPoint or for a poster. But I'll go ahead and get rid of this key legend here on the right. You can keep it in, you can move it around. I don't really find them to be particularly useful at this stage. I usually end up drawing them in my, later on. if I feel it's needed for whatever particular venue I'm using it for. Next thing is I come up here to charts, and you see chart styles. One of the things you'll notice is that this is sort of the standard style that Office decided to go with. These gradients, they drive me crazy. I spend most of my time just adjusting those, and I do this all the time. So getting graphs over into Illustrator and making these subtle changes for people when they come to me with requests, this tends to be one of the things that I spend the most amount of time on. But it can be done really simply if it's handled earlier on. It'll save a lot of time once you move into Illustrator. One of the other things that's going to be kind of hard to notice here, let's see how close I can get to this, is that there's a tiny drop shadow also associated with this graph. And what I should show you perhaps is what happens when you try and transfer that over into Illustrator. You'll get you'll get a little error which will pop up here. Let's make another really quickly, just to show you what it's going to look like. Let's say here's our little quick graph of what's going to be awful, trying to translate this over in an Illustrator file. Bring it over here. I'll create a new document, and go ahead and make that kind of smaller. And there it goes. All right, and I will paste this in using Command+V. I copied it using Command+C. That's again the Mac keyboard controls keyboard shortcuts for copy and paste. Command+C Copy, Command+V for paste. If it's a PC, it'll be Control+C and Control+V respectively. But you can see here I have Command+V, and as you can see, I've got this unknown shading type was encountered. That's that drop shadow I was mentioning a little bit ago. Illustrator doesn't know exactly what to do with it. It'll go ahead and generate it for you, but it doesn't really like it very well. You can see there it is. It looks kind of pixelated because it wasn't really sure how to render that gradient. Illustrator can do gradients. As you can see, the blue bars are a gradient, but for some reason those drop shadows just drive it nuts. In addition, you'll notice this text. The font, it's all gobbledygook, and that's entirely due to that decision I was telling you about using Calibri. For whatever reason, Illustrator just isn't happy with it. So that's part of the reason why you want to go ahead and make that adjustment before you transfer everything over to Illustrator to do your touch-up work, because you're going to be having to re-enter all that text, and that's just a pain. It's very unnecessary, because you could a couple of seconds in Excel and PowerPoint can save you a large amount of time in Illustrator. So let's go back to this graph as we've been kind of touching it up, and how we're going to go ahead and help out with that gradient, that error that we had seen previously. As well as getting rid of this the drop shadow of the error that we saw previously. But we're also going to get rid of this gradient here that we see in the bars. Just by coming up to the chart styles, click the little drop-down arrow. I'm not entirely sure what it's like on a PC version of Office. But really what you want to do is select this top one. It's a simple version. It's just a solid color, a nice clean bar, no additional extra razzmatazz added. And so already, to me, this is a significantly improved figure. So I already feel like the communication that it's portraying is really, really improved. One additional thing that we'll go ahead and add here, because we have it, is let's see, format. No. Format data series. There we go. And there's going to be a couple things we're going to do here. The first is this option. Really, there's only two things here: the overlap, which we're not going to mess with, but this gap width, and that's how much space there is between each one of these columns. I prefer to go with about a 50% gap width. I think that looks clean and understandable, and there's not a lot of extra white space. I want something that can draw the eye to it, help people look at this and understand really what is trying to be expressed here in this graph. And that's already looking a lot cleaner. The next thing I need to do is these error bars. I'm going to add them in. I like to add the little cap to my error bars. That's pretty standard. That helps to define their limits. We'll come in here and specify these values. Go ahead and click and drag all the way down to here. And then that's for the positive error. And you can go ahead and select all, copy, and paste that in. And now we have our negative errors as well. And we can see it's already, the preview is generated for us. Let's see. The other thing is this fill. What you want to do is hit, oh no, that's for the actual, no, you don't need to mess with that really. If you wanted to change the colors here, you could easily. You can also go in and then change them individually. It's a little bit more challenging to do in PowerPoint and Excel, in my opinion, but you can do that if you so choose. Make sure that that drop shadow is off. That's probably the only other important thing. So go ahead and hit OK with that. Some of the other things I like to do for my graphs is I like to get rid of these major grid lines. I don't think that they're particularly helpful. I like to also format the plot area. That's making sure you click on the empty space. And you go to the fill, and you change it from automatic to no fill. Because right now it's actually, the automatic is a white background. And later on when you want to move your figure into say PowerPoint again, let's say you had a colored background and you want it to kind of match your theme, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do that because you're going to have this white background on the figure, and your colored background will kind of be blocked out. And so if you kind of keep it with a no fill, then you won't have that problem. You'll actually see whatever color or texture you might have in the back. And I like that a lot. With the line, you also want to make sure that there's no line. Now the next thing will be to right click on the and format chart area. That's actually making sure you're not selecting the part of the actual graph itself, but the behind it. This is going to be the same idea. No line, and come back up to fill, and you're going to add no fill. Now what you're going to see is you can see the cells on the Excel sheet behind it now, and that's because there's no longer any colors for the background of it, and that's going to really help things stand out. Now the only other thing that I might do differently here, it can easily be done in Illustrator, is you can actually format these axes a little bit better to make sure that they're the way you want them to look. That'll save you a little bit of time. If you want to change the scale, it's a little bit easier to do it here than it is in Illustrator. It can be done, but it's a little bit easier to do it now as opposed to later. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is for the line of it, the automatic is actually this sort of gray color, and I'm going to change it over into black. I think that makes it quite a bit nicer. If you have multiple graphs with similar data that you're going to compare in kind of like a panel view, like with panel A, B, C, and D, one thing to also consider is your scales. Try and keep those kind of consistent. That's something that gets overlooked a lot until kind of it's brought to somebody's attention. So for the most part, I'd say that's really all I want to do with this graph. Again, it didn't change the font. I wonder why I want to move back. Okay. Going to get that back into Arial here. And I like to try and increase the font size a little bit. I think it's going to mess... Oh, it didn't this time. You'll have to kind of play with it because it likes to rescale these axes a bit. One thing that you can do now too is if you stretch this out, that's going to be the height and width ratio when you move it over into Illustrator. So whatever you set it as here is going to be that way over in Illustrator. And so try and make that adjustment now if you can. If you don't really know, it's okay. It's not a big deal. So yeah. All right, let's go ahead and copy this now. That's Command+C on a Mac, Control+C on a PC. Move over to my Adobe Illustrator blank document, and I will go ahead and paste it in, Command+V. And we have our wonderful little graph. It's a little bit larger than our actual document is, so the white is the document size, we can go ahead and adjust that down if we want. And that's just going to, I'm holding shift as I click and drag, and that's going to scale everything evenly. Go ahead and center that so we have a nice working distance, and I'm hitting Command-0, and that recenters my field of view to fit everything within, to fit the artboard within the window that I have open here, the size of the window. So now you basically can do a lot now. You have it as a vector, which is nice and scalable, infinitely scalable. You can make it as large or as small as you want without it being distorted or pixelated. That's one of the advantages of working in Illustrator. You can also come in and change tiny details to help emphasize certain areas of the graph. It's also really useful if you want to combine different graphs, either in panels or if you want to convey multiple different features, such as additional information, like if we wanted to add a third axis or something like that. We could easily overlay graphs here in Illustrator and scale them to the same size. One of the things to make it a little bit easier to start making these minor adjustments, when you convert or bring anything from the Office suite into Illustrator, one of the things that will happen is a lot of these will be kept as compound masks, clipping masks, or compound paths, and that kind of makes it more difficult to do some of these editing. So if I click and drag, I'm actually selecting a larger portion. If I were to delete, you can see I lose a lot of the information. That's not very helpful. I want to be able to edit all of these elements individually. So one way to do that is to select all, and I can do that by doing Command-A. Again, that's for the Mac. And then I can right-click and do Release Clipping Mask. And what that's going to do is now it's going to allow these to all be singly editable objects as opposed to more complex objects. In addition, we're going to have to look at, there's a couple of the clipping masks that are going to be kept, but we can kind of work around those. We'll bring those up as they sort of pop up. So for some reason my computer is giving me a little bit of, oops, deselect that. Let's select all. For some reason my computer's acting a little slow. I'm in the market of looking to upgrade, so hopefully before too long I'll be able to get a new one that I can do these videos a little bit more smooth. So what I've done now is I've actually switched the cursors that I'm using. So Selection Tool and the Direct Selection Tool are probably the two tools that I use the most in a lot of what I'm doing in Illustrator. The Selection Tool is kind of just like your general cursor. If you click on something, it's going to select it. This Direct Select tool is a little bit more specific. So you can see now I've highlighted this anchor, or it's the end of this line. If I click it, now it is the only thing that's going to be edited. I can actually click and drag it, and you can see I'm just sort of stretching out that line that's part of that error bar. It's kind of a useful tool, and you can do all sorts of individual manipulations with it, and that's actually what we're going to be using next. So you can hit toggle between them by hitting A, and that'll get you to the selection tool, V is the selection tool, and A is the direct selection. That's usually what I do. Sometimes I'll just hit it until my mouse is the cursor is the right color that I'm looking for. But what we're going to do is just sort of select some of this blank area up here. That's going to include some of the corners of our graph, and I'm going to hit delete. And I've only hit delete once because I wanted to show you something really quick. You see this text down here? That's because part of our clipping mask has been deleted that was still being reserved within this graph. And this order that I'm doing things is kind of important to, you can go ahead and release clipping masks, but the order is pretty helpful in terms of how we will move forward in doing some of the minor edits. So whilst everything else is still kind of selected, I'm going to hit delete again, and that's going to remove the last clipping mask. So the only other aspect to this is, I'm going to go back to my selection tool. There are these weird paths that surround the text. It tends to only be text that isn't going in horizontal, like a typical horizontal plane for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but that's just sort of an artifact of transferring from Office to Adobe. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to select those paths and delete them because they're not useful for anything that we're going to be doing in terms of editing. Okay, the only other path or compound issue that I'm going to talk about for this video is if you want to adjust anything with these axes, is that if you see if I collect the tick marks on the scale bar that make up the scales of the axis, it's actually selecting all of them as opposed to just the one that I clicked upon. So what's happened is that is a compound path, and we actually need to release that if we want to make any kind of adjustment. Sometimes I'll do that if I want to play with the scale of things, or if I want to sort of adjust, like add additional tick marks or something like that, or adjust lengths. And for particular reasons, let's say every 10th decimal place I wanted a long line as opposed to a short. I'd want to release the clipping mask in order to do that. The same is going to be true down here at the bottom. So if I wanted to release that compound path, I could. And for example, how that might be useful, so now I can select just that individual tick mark and do things to it if I want to. So how that might be useful is if we come back to the original data and you see we have the pectins here, which are a type of carbohydrate. There are, let's see, 6 of them in this graph, from RABA to RGI. So let's say here's RABA all the way to RGI. That's technically a category. I could zoom in here. I hit the Z button. That gives me the little magnifying glass. It's also this little button here. It looks like that. Zoom in here real close, like grab my direct select tool on that little tick mark, and I can drag it down and make it as long as I want. And now that can actually kind of represent a way that we could categorize this data a little bit further if we wanted to. I'm not going to be doing that for this particular figure, but that's just sort of an option to keep in mind. So let's see, what else? Now we have our actual graph pretty much almost ready to be edited as you know, in terms of the finite details. When I click on the individual blue bars here, they are kind of selected as a group. If you wanted to come in and change the color as a group, you could do so now. Also, if you wanted to change individual bars' color, you'd want to release, again, a compound path. So now when I select back on that bar, it's an individual object as opposed to selecting all of them at once. And so, let's see, RGI was the one that was part of that carbohydrate, at the end of that carbohydrate group. So now what I could do is sort of help emphasize a particular area, is I could select these bars, come over here, make sure my fill box is selected, whichever one is on top here. This is the strokes, that's like the line that goes around the object. This is the color inside. The line through it means that there's no color associated. But we have this fill color here, which is what we imported from Excel. And I want to change that to, well, I don't know, whatever suiting my fancy for the moment. I like this dark green color. And now we have that nice and dark. And we could come in and add a little line that's maybe the same color, and then a definition of what that color means here underneath. We could go through and do that with all these guys until sort of they're all individually categorized, and that would be a nice way to sort of emphasize these differences between the different carbohydrates and look at how they compare as groups to the growth of this particular bacterium. One other thing that you might want to play with, you can come in here and you can play with the text if you need to. You can change the size, you can bold or italicize as you need, or even the font. I like to go ahead and make my axes here in Illustrator as opposed to importing them, just personal preference. One way I go about doing that is I usually keep the font pretty similar. I may just bold it to whatever axis it's on. And so I'll click on a sort of a representation of the text that I want, and with the selection tool, and I'll hit the option button. I'll hold down the option button while my mouse cursor is hovering over it. You can see that's also the Alt button for those who are PC users. And you can see I have a double arrow now. What happens if I click and drag away from that? I can hold the Shift key, and that'll kind of keep it in parallel either direction, just like it would in PowerPoint. But when I let go of my mouse cursor, now I've made a copy of that over in the place that I've dragged it. And that can be done with any object. I can do that here with this particular bar if I want to. You can just hit the Option Alt key and the Shift key, drag it over directly, and now I have a copy of that particular bar. So with this text, I can go ahead and change it to read whatever I want it to be. I'm going to actually keep it as this text here, which was part of the original supplemental document. Let's see. Alright, I've selected it, and now I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to come back over to Illustrator, and I've double-clicked on my text box here, and I'm just going to paste it. You could also use this, here's the tool for doing type. You can also just click it, and it'll just work as if you're making a text box. But I'll go ahead and paste in my my font, my text that I want it to read. If you can see, if I'm holding down the Command, I assume it'd be the same as if you're holding down Control on PC. That allows me to sort of toggle between this text tool and the selection tool, which allows me to move it around. Also allows me to stretch it if I need to change the size, or and particularly for this axis, I can actually change the orientation. So I'm holding down the Shift key and coming over to that corner and rotating it 90 degrees. And so I'm still holding down that Command key. I'm going to drag it over, and now I have an axis that is labeled for this particular graph. I usually like to make them a little bit bigger sometimes, depending again on what my purpose is, but I often will just bold whatever my axis is. I feel that that's a nice way to kind of emphasize it. But you can see with just a little bit more time, we can kind of clean this up, make it however we need it to be. Overall, this is pretty good graph, especially considering it was just a supplemental table just a short while ago. This is sort of my finalized version. Again, this kind of helps to emphasize how there might be differences between particular groups of carbohydrates and how bacteria might respond differently within those groups. You can see this other group, it didn't grow very well. And that's nicely depicted here, that for me works a lot better than trying to look at this in a tabular form. So one of the other things you can do, if let's say your white background is a little bit smaller or bigger than what you need it to be, you can come up here to the document setup, click Edit Artboard, and that'll allow you to drag it to whatever size you need it to be. And you can save it as is, and that's how large it'll be when you save it as another document type, or say import it into Excel, into PowerPoint or Keynote or your poster. When I save these, I usually like to save them not as Illustrator files, but actually I prefer to save them as Adobe PDFs. These are still editable in Illustrator. I could save it and then re-import it back into Illustrator. I can also move it easily into Photoshop, and I can drop it into PowerPoint and Keynote pretty easily, and it's a really nice format. Alternatively, you could use this vector graphic, and that's kind of nice because it's again scalable. It's a pretty common file type that almost anybody could use. And because we got rid of that background color initially, if we add any background colors in our PowerPoint slides or on our posters, then that'll show through behind it, and that's kind of a nice touch if it's done well. If not, I mean, you can always just add a white colored solid behind it in your presentation or on your poster. So, well, that's all I have for today. I hope this is helpful. If you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to include them down below. Also, if there's a particular technique or skill that you would like to learn, I'd be happy to teach you, if I know how to do it, that is. Or if you have any recommendations on how to maybe do this a little bit more effectively, please feel free to let the community know. This is really meant to just sort of help people improve their overall quality of their scientific communications, whether or not it's for any kind of venue, figures for papers or for presentations, or even something as simple as like lab meetings or journal clubs. All those things are pretty important in our role as scientists, making sure that we can communicate our story to our colleagues as well as to the lay public. So I hope this has been helpful. This has been Science Communication Tips, and look forward